Hey, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec here. Wanted to chat a little bit about a story that I saw recently. This actually has to do with the Declaration of Independence, Facebook, and censorship. Right, so kind of a great trifecta of well-themed things for this week. Right, obviously Declaration of Independence, well-themed for July 4th, the Independence Day. Declaration of Independence is what is the document effectively that started our journey, the U.S. journey to independence from Britain, which is incidentally where I'm filming this from. We also have Facebook, which has been in the news a lot recently. From the calls in front of the congressional subcommittees and in front of the Senate to censor, specifically censor political advertising or certain types of political advertising, certainly to censor fake news, information about opioids and where to buy illegal drugs, and a number of other things that they have come under the gun for not censoring. And then as we rotate back around here, excuse me, certainly at Facebook, and then talking more about some censorship side. Article 13, which you may recall if you've watched some of the other videos this week, is part of the European Union Copyright Directive. Thankfully, was voted down July 5th, or at least voted down in its current form. A little too close for my taste, but again, definitely voted down. Be back up for vote in September, or at least back up for discussion in September. That said, let's chat a little bit about the story. The story effectively involves a newspaper in Texas. This newspaper in Texas had been posting a number of different posts with paragraphs on the Declaration of Independence. Post 1 through 9 went just fine. Post number 10 was deleted by Facebook for violating, quote, our community guidelines. Now, of course, Facebook, again, I want to be perfectly fair to them and note that they've been in the news a lot recently. And a lot of the congressional testimony that Zuckerberg had to very uncomfortably, obviously uncomfortably, sit through, most of that actually had to do with, well, a lot of things. Certainly privacy, but a lot of it came back to why aren't you doing enough to protect privacy, and certainly then to censor media appropriately, specifically as it comes to political ads, again, the drug epidemic, etc. So again, I feel bad for Facebook in the sense that they have a very tough challenge in front of them. I also feel bad for them in the sense that again, not easy being in their position. They obviously have to use automated means to filter anything on a content platform that size. So we have to identify then again, what's good for automated filtering, what's bad for automated filtering. It's probably worth noting that one of the specific passages in the deleted post for the Declaration of Independence actually involved the words Indian savages. Right now, these words do actually appear in, I believe it's paragraph 30, if I'm not mistaken, of the Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately, in 1776, when this document was written, our forefathers weren't exactly politically correct with the terms of today, more than 200 years later. Now, I certainly don't advocate the use of words like Indian savages versus, maybe unruly Native Americans who are mad that we're stealing their land. Rightfully so, I might add. Again, I certainly am not going to defend the Founding Fathers, but again, when you put this in the historical context, there's a greater question of whether or not this post should be deleted. Now, I'm actually not going to dive down that road of do I believe the post should be deleted or not. There are some that will say anything that matches that content or that matches a content filter should automatically be deleted. I think there are others that are going to argue that or try to make the argument that because the Declaration of Independence is such an important historical document that it shouldn't be deleted. Again, I'm not going to weigh in on that. I would like to make notes about both sides of those arguments, however. And of course, there are people in the middle ground that will say we should treat it on a case-by-case basis. And while that's neat, and while I don't disagree with you fundamentally, I will note that Facebook is too large of a content platform for that to be realistic, right? They can't look at everything on a case-by-case basis. It's simply not feasible. So let's talk about the other two alternatives. It's the blanket, it matches some content, therefore it's bad and can't be posted, and the what about the if it's an important historical document, then it should definitely be allowed to be posted. Well, let's tackle the first one first, the important historical document. I won't argue that the Declaration of Independence for the United States is a very important historical document and definitely shouldn't be, portions of it I feel like shouldn't be deleted even if they offend the sensibilities a little bit here and there, I would say overall the context of the document is that it is not hate speech. Right? Now, while some of, again, the words Indian savages, for instance, could be construed in other contexts to be hate speech, this clearly is not. Now, I certainly then can't make the argument, though, that all historical documents should be protected as not hate speech, because I can think of lots of examples of historical documents that are the very document itself is hate speech. Mein Kampf is a great example of such. And if we make the argument that we can post the Declaration of Independence because it's a historical document, others with other political persuasions could come along and say, well, if you can post that, then you can clearly post this other document. Now, of course, Facebook, is going to make their own rules. They are their own content provider. They're not a public, they're not a public asset necessarily. Although some have noted that, given their prominence in the field, that they may actually start to be designated or may need to be designated as critical infrastructure. Right. Again, I think that's probably a different topic for a different time, because there are other social media platforms, one could argue, should also be critical infrastructure, right? And the President of the United States very clearly gets much of his news and communicates a lot of news makes a lot of news on Twitter. And one could argue, whether you like that or not, one could argue that as a result, Twitter may itself also be a critical infrastructure platform. Bottom line, it's not today. Twitter is not. Facebook is not. But again, as we start looking at these, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, again, do we want to then blanket, or should we be pressuring Facebook, maybe is the right words, because certainly there is pressure being placed upon Facebook to take certain actions by Congress and senators, Congress people and senators alike. As we look at this, should they then be pressured to allow the posting of historical documents? I think the answer to that is no. Right? Again, there can't be a blanket policy based on that. So let's take a look at the other extreme, which is because again, the extremes are really the only things that we have to work with. The case-by-case basis simply isn't going to work here, right? Again, just due to scale. We come back then and we look at another look at the other option here, which is just a blanket block content. I come back to the story here about Article 13, because make no mistake about it. Article 13 was going to create something very similar to this using machine learning. I would have to use machine learning. There's no two ways about it. Do partial content matches, and so they were going to use machine learning basically to automatically identify offending works. Well, in this case, if they were using machine learning and identified a piece of an offending work, let's say, for instance, that I wrote a novel about the Declaration of Independence, where I included a piece of the Declaration of Independence. These posts that then replicated those pieces, even though that wasn't my original work in the novel, could subsequently be matched and then prevented from being uploaded, or the posts themselves being deleted automatically. Again, as we take a look at this, bear in mind that, while it's unfortunate that this particular post was taken down automatically, what's even more concerning is that this is what we can expect a lot of, and much more overzealously in the future. I always use the example with DMCA about X-Files. You heard me mention this probably in an earlier video, but this gentleman had made some patches to the X server, or Xorg files, and basically this is the server that effectively runs your GUI desktop on most Unixes and definitely most Linuxes as well. Because he uploaded the files as xorg-source-files.tgz, Fox came after him and issued a DMCA takedown notice, or at least one of their registered affiliates or authorized affiliates registered as DMCA takedown notice because it matched the word X-Files. Now, this is patently ridiculous. It's obvious to anybody who looks at this. This is not really X-Files like Mulder and Scully. It's clear that this is in context, right? Is clearly the X server files. Again, the fact that the word Xorg appeared together, right? X and org appeared together would seem to imply that. Now, again, we come back to content matching and we come back to machine learning. Now we start to get a little bit iffy here, right? So again, I use these as examples of some of the fear that I have of machines making automated decisions like this. The follow-up there is when a machine does make an automated decision, when an algorithm makes decisions for us about what is and is not appropriate, how do we handle that? that? That's another question that I think we have to answer, because our content providers have to come up with some way for us to resolve some of these false positives here, as well as false negatives for that matter. And it seems like Facebook is there's a good way to report a false negative. There's not a particularly good way to report a good false positive and get a resolution here. Again, I mentioned before that the paper had a lot of trouble trying to resolve this issue and get the post restored. And of course, too many of these posts that are automatically identified could result in an account being suspended, right? And of course, again, as we start talking about critical infrastructure and communication, this newspaper, in Texas, this could be a communication platform for others in the area. Again, folks that are looking for information from the paper assume no information means there's no relevant information that they need to act on, and of course, they may not know that that account has been suspended or prevented from posting new material. Again, lots of ifs, lots of unknowns here. But again, these are scenarios that I want you to think about coming down the road as we look at more automation going into these platforms, right? One of the things, if you are a content platform, or you do serve the public in some way like this, again, having the ability for a member of the public to come back to you and say, hey, this is not right. Your filter took down non-infringing content. Having a good resolution process for that in place is fairly critical. And again, based on the story, it looks like Facebook's isn't there yet. Bear in mind, I want to be very clear that I'm not, criticizing Facebook in any way. Again, they have been under the gun to filter content, specifically hate speech. They did that, and they did it very well. Overzealously, perhaps, but did it very well. There is always the philosophical question of, if you're not sure, so should we go ahead and delete it? Should we go ahead and let it stand? Where's that going to lie? I'm not going to address that philosophical question here. I think that's probably better for others, maybe outside of the InfoSec field, to answer that question conclusively. But look, I just want to highlight this, highlight the story here. And while the story initially is kind of one of those ha-ha funny kind of things, potentially for some people, who are like, ha-ha, look at how bad machine learning did today. I want you to think about the real-world implications of this, as well as the security implications of this, again, and how ultimately these may shape the platforms that we use. Again, there's a good tie back in here, as I mentioned, back to Article 13. There's obviously tie back into censorship. I doubt 5 years ago that Facebook would have censored this post. Again, a lot of that is coming because of political pressure and fear of regulation, right? If they don't clean up their act, it may be that they are going to be regulated more heavily, right? So again, wanted to kind of highlight all of that. I'll go ahead and cut off the post here, but again, thanks for watching. Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec, signing off.